this later on. Thank you. Okay. So with that, thank you, everyone. I am going to go ahead and share my slides. Want to make sure everyone can see, and then we will kick things off. For those that may not be familiar, hi, my name is Shirley. I'm SWAN Senior Advisor. I'm excited to kick off this interactive workshop, which is all about really the art and science of writing and drafting and curating an abstract, a winning abstract for Smart Water conferences, with a particular focus and emphasis on our own SWAN events. Many of you, and I recognize a lot of names here, but also a lot of new faces, and hopefully those that will catch the recording. Maybe some of you have already applied and submitted abstracts before, or this might be your first time, or it could be that you're submitting an abstract in a new role. And so regardless of where you stand, we hope that you'll find this workshop relevant and compelling for your own work as you look to kind of increase your chances for success at these events. With that, I think we can go ahead and get to the next stage. Please do use the open Q&A. We'll have dedicated time. The goal is for this not to feel like a lecture in any way, even though my dad is a professor, long gone are those types of days. So really do interject at any point and ask any questions. Again, we want this to be as valuable a session as possible, especially with so many SWAN events just around the corner with abstract deadlines coming up, which will definitely end and wrap up. And so I think this is the agenda for today. Again, just a really, really high level, deep kind of look into our engine of what we look for at SWAN. And by SWAN, I mean not only ourselves, I'm joined here by colleagues Amir and Shayna, but really our utility advisory group and colleagues that help form our utility review committees that really go through these abstracts in a blind manner. And I'll explain what that means to really assess the value of these submissions, that it's relevant to the drinking water, wastewater, and utility landscape. We'll talk about some high-level do's and don'ts and some guidelines to enhance some of the quality. I'll also be asking your tips, what's worked for you and what you've learned from past submissions. We'll dive into a couple of really good examples that received high scoring from our utility review committees and advisory groups. You can kind of get a sense for what makes an abstract a winning abstract in our eyes. And then we'll do some of that kind of live practice to kind of get the creative juices flowing a little bit. We'll talk about some questions for you all to consider, almost a checklist, if you will. When you're about to hit that submit button, what are some of those key questions to maybe ask just before you do it again, maximize that effectiveness. And then we'll have very much an open discussion. If you want, we can call it a high level agenda group therapy, if you will, just to kind of hash things out and speak openly. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. Like I said, please do interject. And then Shane and Amir, maybe if I can't see my screen with some of the questions, if you don't mind just letting me know, that would be great. So a little bit of a recipe to success, what we look for in a SWAN related abstract, SWAN event related abstract opportunity. First of all, I think many of you have already been either in utility shoes or you've pitched or work with currently with utilities. We're really all about an actual story, some type of before and after scenario, or even if you're in an interim of a project, what are some of those outputs and outcomes that you can share to really show this kind of partnership that you formed with a utility? If they're your utility submitting, of course, it's from your own shoes, your own perspective. It's really, really important for us. Think of this not as just an output summary of maybe water research related work you've done or just in project outcome, but really that entire story in a short, concise manner. And that's the art and science behind a really good, compelling abstract submission. Really importantly, you'll see this resurface a lot, but I can't overstate this. It just raises flags. Anything you write that comes across as a sales pitch will come across as a sales pitch. There's no way to get by it. We immediately see it. We actually ask our review teams to flag it accordingly. And so this is just something that we know doesn't resonate well with our SWAN audience. Again, many of you have been to SWAN events before. It just doesn't come across well. Really, the best sales in general is really telling that compelling story overall. So that number one item. And again, we'll talk about some do's and don'ts to help you formulate that. Practical lessons learned, but also some of the unexpected outcomes. We're really looking for, again, those stories aren't all linear. The more abstract that kind of touch on key elements related throughout your project, kind of the ups and downs and what you learned along the way, and also the outcomes that your own utility customers experience. We're really, really interested in extracting those insights. So that's also really important to note. Tangible and intangible benefits. I'm not sure if she's on the call, but we've touched a lot on intangible benefits. As actually a result, we were inspired by an abstract that actually did really well, and eventually she is Janelle Bolter from Southern Nevada Water Authority. She spoke about in her abstract, a really good one, about intangible benefits that her labor force experienced as a result of digital transformation technology. And she highlighted that, and that's also something that's really inspired us, is to not only highlight the tangible number hours saved, number of leaks detected, excuse me, but also maybe some of the skills gained by staff along the way. That's sometimes hard to quantify. We're very much interested in covering that through your stories. Really important. We see a lot of submissions either that have come in or in the past that you can kind of really tell right away if they've been just kind of copied and pasted. They don't really fit with a theme. They didn't really touch on the abstract figure if there's a graphic or muse that you can leverage, which the SWAN annual conference does have this year as well. So really being able to tie the submission to the theme, and we'll talk about some ways to go about that, is really, really key. It shows us that you really understand the SWAN value, the SWAN audience, and why our theme is so important to accelerating smart water globally. So that's really, really important. And then pre, during, post scenarios, we really, again, want to see that that story and that transition from the digital transformation landscape. Let me just stop here. Are there any questions so far or any comments before we move on to the next slide? Okay, let's keep going. So do's and don'ts. This is a work in progress for us, these types of workshops. So again, really interested in also your feedback. We held a similar workshop for our young professional community, RISC, Rising Smart Water Professionals, of which I see a couple of familiar faces. We've since added to this based on feedback and, of course, lessons learned along the way from different events. So these are some high-level do's and don'ts. Curious at the end to also hear, of course, your feedback. Beyond, and again, you won't see some of the usuals here. So the don't is don't miss the deadline, right? Like, please don't ask for an extension. We have a lot going on. So don't ask for an extension and don't go over the word count. It's really difficult. We're trying to manage a lot of submissions around the world. So that's not even here. We're talking about kind of beyond the usual suspects, if you will. But let's talk about the positives. We spoke about this, tie the abstract into the event theme. By that, I mean not only the keywords, and for example, for the SWAN conference in Berlin, annual one, we're talking about scaling smart water. So it's not just a quick, easy win of using the word scaling in your theme or your title. Trust me, I've been there before in marketing shoes. That won't cut it, right? It has to be beyond that in the substance of what you write. We're really, really focusing on our theme. The SWAN team spends a lot of time really unpacking what it is that we are looking for in these abstracts. If you go to the SWAN conference webpage as an example, you'll see an actual guide and image that we were influenced by Accenture in that case of what it means to scale as you look to formulate a sustainable and responsible organization, what we mean by scaling. There's different layers and levers. Really look at what we're look at those guidelines really to help you as you submit. So it's keywords, it's also the context and the focus of the theme. So the theme is critical. That storytelling is critical. Data can help tell the story, but it's also your utility vendor, utility engineering firm, or utility engineering firm vendor relationship that is important to tell a story in your submission. Really think of familiar and relatable language. It should be very clearly upon reading not only the title, but also the abstract, what the pain point that utility felt, how you're addressing it, again, in that form of a narrative, should be very clear, even from a quick scan of your abstract submission. So really, you'll see that's related. Using familiar language is great, is a do. Don't is to use jargon or overly complex language that really moves away from the story that you're trying to tell. Do, if you can, mention a utility name, a customer. Again, so long as you have approval to do so, it will, of course, provide that customer validation. This is, in fact, not something high level or abstract, but it's a real use case and real insights to share. In case I don't see, there's some utilities, but in case the utility customer is not submitting, seek approval to mention their name. The more you can have a utility submit on your behalf. So those insights, that story, it's coming from their perspective, whether they procure, lease a software, and there's some insights as a result, that will be very well received by the Utility Review Committee, or in the SWAN annual conference, our Global Utility Advisory Group. At least if you can, get a green light to mention them in your submission. Consider unique formats. This is something we've added, and therefore it hasn't been announced in previous workshops such as this. For those that attended our Vancouver conference, our annual conference, we tried new models to keep the content engaging and lively. So for example, if you remember, there was a cyber role reversal panel where the utility actually played the role of the hacker. And we had it moderated as well by another utility member. And then we had the kind of tech provider perspective, really kind of filling into the utility shoes. It was very well received. So if you have a unique submission, kind of think of this outside of the box, whether it's more of a prove it like submission, you really want to show a use case. You want to step into different types of shoes. We're curious. Let's put it that way. We would love to receive these submissions as long as, again, it still ties into the theme and there's some interesting insights that you can share. Measurable results, but also that intangible value when applicable. I think I mentioned this before. We're definitely interested in KPIs. It could be the usual suspects of direct technology outputs and how that affected, of course, the utility in terms of operationally IT, OT, but also those intangible benefits, again, across people, processes, and technologies is really, really valuable for our community. This is usually, I'll talk about a little bit of the review criteria, but this X factor. When the abstracts are reviewed, they are reviewed blindly in the sense that company names and affiliations are removed in order to reduce bias. And so what we're looking to give bonus points for is if there's any topics that have maybe been insufficiently covered in the past, or they're addressing a vulnerable group, or for example, addressing small utilities, that may receive some bonus points in terms of factoring into the agenda, because as you all know, the submissions and the review process really helps shape the agenda. Every year we challenge ourselves at SWAN to make sure that our events stand out and are really must-attend events. We want to hear from new stories and new case studies. Let's stop there for a second before we go into the don'ts, because that's always fun to talk about what not to do. But any suggestions here on maybe what's missing or what's worked well for you in terms of a do? And obviously Shane and Amir from our team, if you want to add anything, but do feel free to unmute yourself.
Hey, Shirley, it's Tony from Xylem. How are you?
Hey, good to see you, Tony. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, I'm gonna relay all this back to our team because I noticed nobody's here. But hey, I just like maybe it's a little bit harder in this environment, but I'm gonna throw the idea out there.
Okay.
What if it's not tied to a utility at all, and it's more of a technical kind of thing? Research that's been done, maybe things that may be tied to how success stories of how or new ways. I'm throwing things
Yeah.
out just to come up with an example, but it's more technical research, maybe on regulations and how they're overcoming, how people, ways to overcome regulations or how to overcome the funding issues that cities have trying to get funding for digital and the buy-in to digital, but it's not necessarily tied to a utility, more of a true technical white paper research kind of thing. That.
No, it's a fantastic question. I will say that I feel like we're going to get more and more of these types of submissions as well, Tony, because of that, right? Because it's going to take not only the direct use case and case studies to illustrate and accelerate smart water, there are going to be discussions that factor into unique financial blending models to help scale smart water adoption. So I really get that. I say go for it. As long as you're able, Tony, to tie it into the theme, show how it connects to scaling. Ideally, a utility, and let's say utility / regulator, when they would hear that type of submission or read that type of submission, and then hopefully the actual presentation, they would see value. I think that should be okay. Again, if you remember our SWAN audience, it's anything from the utilities, regulators, right, vendors, so all can benefit from that. So I'm curious, definitely curious to read it.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Anybody else, whether it's questions or any recommendations on to-dos that work well before we dive into the don'ts, which are equally, if not even more important to reflect on?
I have a question, if I may.
Please.
My name is Adriana, and I'm working for Global Product Marketing and Devoting. And I'm in the middle of an abstract submission, basically. So it's a very good timing for me in this case. And then, so we are preparing an abstract for Australia mining event. And then the topic is like new way of devotering minds. And we are lucky enough to work with a customer case, so we have the consent. We are able to mention about the cooperation with the customer and using data, quotes, whatever. And also we are like super enthusiast about the topic, so we are like writing a lot. And then there were some rules what we had to fulfill about the length. So the length, I'm trying to have some guidelines, guys, from you. Like, is there any optimal length of an abstract? I mean, obviously, we try to meet the rules what they are asking from us, but it was like maximum 16 pages, which is like super long, I would say.
Oh, wow.
And then since, as I said, we are like super enthusiastic about the topic. And then we had a lot of photos, a lot of charts, diagrams, whatever. So we maxed that 16 pages, but I think like it's too much. Like, if I'm thinking with the customers or the event visitors mind, like, who's gonna read all those 16 pages, right? So my question is mainly just have some guidelines about the length of an abstract.
Sure. Absolutely. So I'm not, it's probably a very different audience. Yeah. And I see, Mark, you have your hand up. Our conferences and workshops, again, this is not only relevant for our SWAN annual conference. This type of workshop is relevant for all SWAN related events that have an abstract. Our sweet spot is between 500 to 700 words, not pages, words. So it is very brief. And that is another thing, is be concise. Our goal is you are not sharing your whole presentation here. You're giving a little bit of a teaser. You're addressing the what, the who, the why, the how it's been applied, the where it's been applied, to what extent it's been applied. You'll dive deeper if it's accepted. So it's not a research heavy presentation. It's not a poster presentation. It's really a present. Our submissions are usually for an actual speaking engagement live on stage. So 500 to 700 words, and we will always, and if not, please flag it to us, list the length we're looking for, so that you're guided accordingly. Adrian.
Okay, makes sense. Thanks so much.
Is that helpful? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
Three pages. Yeah, got it.
Mark, if you want to unmute yourself, go for it.
So just some things I found on this one. I think you mentioned it, Shirley, about being precise, but sometimes less is more. So you don't go for the maximum number. It's just get it as concise as possible, and always focus on the topic. What's the end game? But sometimes I've found you don't even have to submit a 500 word. It could be a 300 or 400 word abstract. So less is sometimes more.
100% agree. Very much so. We're looking for concise, again, telling the story straight to the point. Well said. Maria, if you want to unmute yourself and also introduce, that would be great. Maria, you just might be on mute. I just see your hand up.
Can you hear me now?
We can. Hi, how are you?
Hello, hi. I have a question. So I see in the column don'ts mention many different companies and utilities within one submission. So what about such use case when you have an innovative solution, which was a co-creation, where you have different stakeholders involved, like universities or any research institutes and the customer and our company for technologies. So we then really do need to mention them all, right?
It's a very good question. I see we're moving over to the don'ts, but it's a good one to flag. And I think what could be helpful is if I write a disclaimer to the right of that. So you're absolutely right. We're very much, especially in scaling, looking for co-curation. There's going to be a lot of partnerships forming. In Smart Water, we've already seen that. We know a lot of your companies have been a part of this. So by that, I mean, not too many, right? What you don't want to end up in reading a submission, if you think about it, is an endless list of, let's call it a grocery list of 10 companies where it's hard to follow. But if it is a scenario where you have collaborated with two companies and then you've have a use case across two different utilities, that's more than welcome. The too many is what we're trying to avoid, because it's very, very hard to process. Okay, well, how did this actually happen, right? How was that story told? Who should we reach out to for more information? So I think if you can narrow that, I think that's more than invited. But absolutely, we're looking for co-curation. That's a very good point to flag that, Maria.
And another case would be that we have a scalable, innovative solution with different customers already proven. Like there was an innovative co-creation approach we have developed that was scaled up and already implemented into follow-up projects. So as a proof of scalability itself. So are we going to mention just one of them, or does it help or enhance even to mention both customers, for example?
You could, as long as it's enhancing your submission and it's not just kind of to add words, that's what we're looking for here. If it gives a little bit of that familiar validity, that we read it and we recognize the problem, and we'll look at two really great examples, Maria, and I think you'll see what we mean by adding a little bit of content, but not too much. But I think, Maria, that should work well for that validation. Yeah.
Provided we have the consent from the customer, as far as understood, that we really have to look into it before. Yeah.
And again, it's not that we you just email them internally, right? As long as you're submitting, we know that you have that approval. Anyone else, before we highlight just a little bit of the don'ts, even though I think you can kind of see this, some of these are pretty self-explanatory. I do want to touch on a couple. I know we just touched on the mention many different companies. I think we broke that down a little bit more. Is there anything else, questions on this? Okay. These items about, if you remember, one of the first points we made is do not submit a sales pitch. If you avoid overselling your product or service, if kind of talking about a laundry list of features or your company too many times, it clearly shows that the focus is more on the customer and product versus actually addressing the customer pain point. And that's what we're trying to avoid as much as possible here. So really, I think if you kind of embrace some of these don'ts, that will help you craft a more compelling abstract. We have read, you'd be surprised, but we actually have read a number of abstracts that at the end say this technology is the best solution out there. Just like you try to say you're 100% effective, no one is 100% effective. And arguably, there's other great solutions out there as well. That's why it's such a competitive landscape. So try to avoid very absolute statements as much as possible. It will help you, let's say, be in more favor with the utilities that review this. ChatGPT and other tools that, let's call them, are our digital assistants, even researchers or marketing assistants these days. My recommendation, as much as it's a great tool that helps reduce a lot of hours of work, don't be overly reliant or overly dependent. If it helps to kind of get the creative juices flowing, great. But if you're copying, pasting from a ChatGPT, I guarantee you it will not be fully authentic. But the more you use it for prompts and guidance, that's great. But really just avoid that overall reliance on ChatGPT, especially because they don't have insights into all of your data and the stories that went into your project work. Be careful with too much jargon, too many buzzwords, too many acronyms. Remember, these submissions are often reviewed by global utilities around the world. They might not be familiar. They might have different acronyms, different regulatory environments. Just be cautious of that so that, again, the content is familiar, and back to Mark's point, really concise and less is more in that case. But in acronyms, I would list it out to avoid any confusion. I'm going to go ahead. By the way, any other don'ts that people want to give away here? Or no one wants to give their secret sauce? Okay. So with that, I want to give an example. I tried to remove, hopefully I didn't forget to remove any mention of a utility name or a company name. You might know who this is, you might not. Maybe you have a similar solution or product offering or feature offering. But the point is, I wanted to take a deeper dive, and then for sure leave room for questions at the end as well. Two really good examples. By good examples, good means they've been evaluated by our utility committees in the past, and they received really high marks. And we'll talk about what those marks are after I just show you some of these examples. You know what? Maybe before we do, if that's okay with you, let me skip to actually what we're looking for, and then we'll go back. Our review committees follow a set of criteria. We're constantly reevaluating if this is the right way to go about abstract submissions, but for now, it's a working formula for us. So I'm kind of showing you what's beneath the car hood, if you will. The level of originality, innovative. Is it something new that we're hearing, or it's kind of the same type of use cases that what we've been hearing in the past? Criteria 2 is it actually clear? Is it very easy to read? Is it concise, straight to the point? Do we feel like this would make for a very compelling story? Criteria 3 is really the relevance to the abstract theme and those different focus areas we're looking for. A really good abstract, if you recall, and I can show an image of this later, for the SWAN annual conference in Berlin in May, we have that figure showing what we mean by scaling across different dimensions. If you can show how your abstract ties into different parts and how they're interrelated, that's usually tells a really compelling story. So again, that significance and impact relevance to show the value to the audience, a very, very important criteria for us. And then I think I briefly mentioned the bonus criteria, something unique that you're bringing to the table. Again, maybe it hasn't been covered sufficiently, or maybe you feel that it's something unique that deserves some bonus points here. Mark, I see your hand is up. Go for it.
Sorry, just this is the kind of professor in me coming out. Point number 2, there's something called a fog index. So basically what you don't want is one sentence that kind of makes you take 4 breaths, while reading it. So it goes back again to the conciseness, but don't write a paragraph, which is one sentence from start to finish. It's like, just break it up, make it easier to understand. And again, that helps you actually kind of be precise and stick to the target. So long sentences for when I've adjudicated abstract just put you off already, because you got to go, okay, carry on reading, and then, so you've got to take a breath. So it's just a grammar thing. But I find it very, very useful to, sometimes you need a medium length sentence, sometimes a short one, but don't write lots and lots of long ones.
Agree. And just for the purpose of these slides, they might come across long, but that was only to fit the slides. But Mark, a really, really great point about breaking it down. Think of a really compelling blog that you write that has kind of 3 key takeaways, key insights, learning objectives. It's really, really helpful for crafting an abstract. Thank you, Mark. Anybody else? Questions about, and again, this can be modified and adjusted, but more likely or not, this is what helps guide our utilities when they review. Any questions about the criteria or other insights? Okay. I want to show you an example that is actually broken down pretty nicely. Hopefully you agree, Mark. I'm not going to tell you the title. What we're going to hopefully do afterwards is a little bit of this kind of workshop. Maybe you can propose a winning title, and I can tell you if you're close, because the title is, that's our cover story, right? That's our cover narrative. We want it to be compelling, straight to the point, make you want to read the full submission. But I wanted to share this. I'm going to leave it just on the screen for about a minute, just for you all to read and internalize. And then I want to talk about why this is a winning abstract in our view. So let's just give it a minute. I don't know, we can kind of cue in Jeopardy music. Not really, but I'll give a minute. As you're reading this, again, this might not be the full abstract. I just took a few parts. Does anything stand out to you? Or if you can go into SWAN's shoes, why you think this was a well-received submission? Anyone want to take? Mark, can I put you on the spot maybe?
This would be something I would kind of heading towards the title, but it would be it's pretty much the first sentence, but the second part after the comma. So you're looking at the journey of digitalization between kind of people and business.
You don't have to guess right now the abstract title, but I just kind of, the points here that kind of resonated with us at SWAN when we reviewed this and our village is absolutely kind of that X factor, right? So it does touch on this village. We don't often at SWAN speak about some of that small size. Really important for us, right? That bonus factor is inclusive digital transformation. We talk about scaling. It's not just scaling up, it's scaling across. So that's really, really important. So that was kind of something we highlighted here. We do have direct units, metrics, KPIs in terms of monthly labor hours saved. The pain points, we've all heard this from utilities, right? On data collection, reporting, the amount of time it takes, effort, resources to get it right, the cost of not being compliant, right? So really, really important here. So upon reading just the first few lines, and Mark, you're spot on right in that beginning, you right away see the value is when reading this, I identify, right? I can relate to the problem that this abstract is going to address, right? It's not something too abstract. It's very, very clear. The other thing I really liked here was this one, inconsistencies with data input. I tried to bold the statements that really resonated with us. Right away, again, I see myself nodding with my head and saying, okay, this is very much true. This was another one we bolded, right? We found based on the app usage, the direct relationships between input and tracking, kind of almost not necessarily the direct result of the technology, but others such as being able to optimize chemical related deliveries because there was a connection between kind of the assets and water quality. And so these types of items here made this submission very favorably received. Again, it's not the full abstract, but it's the majority of it. You kind of get it right away. Any other thoughts, or does someone want to maybe guess what a winning title for this abstract was or could be? If you wanted to make this a little bit compelling, it's a little hard, but if you have suggestions.
Let's see how fast ChatGPT is.
Are you copying it into it? Yeah. I mean, I can give some, sorry. Essentially, any takers here? I don't know, in the chat. The submitter here decided to take a play on kind of moving from dead data to lively insights. And one of the reasons they use this terminology was because of the original theme. This was actually for a Milwaukee workshop that we held in partnership with Badger Meter and MMSD. The theme there was related to kind of that data, information, knowledge, wisdom kind of pyramid. And so they felt that helped tell the story moving from kind of just dead data into actual decision-making and insights. And I again, resonated really well with the utilities that reviewed it. So there you have it. That was a winning abstract. We're going to go ahead just for the sake of time. I want to make sure we have enough open Q&A time for the last part of this. This is the second really good abstract submission that actually, if I'm not mistaken, presented in Vancouver. Again, let's give another 1 minute just for kind of a quick review of this actual written submission. And it was further broken down. I just wanted to fit it on a slide. If someone wants to shed light, not on the title yet, I know that's hard, but after reading this or scanning it, what resonates well with you? What can you learn from this kind of positive, well-received abstract? What stands out here to you?
To me, it would be the share best practice on how to ensure sensor data quality at scale and how to capture its full business potential. Just that little sentence.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, that would be relevant also for this conference, but hopefully they won't replicate it exactly. But yeah, Mark, absolutely, right? We want to see best practices. Sensor data quality is a key issue here. We've heard it a lot, really ensuring the data quality assurance, not only just capturing the data itself, different use cases.
Shirley,
They also, yeah, please go for it, Tony.
I also like that our work with many water utilities globe wide says that it's not just a one-off situation, that it is, we're seeing a common pattern here, of which the more we hear that we're going to start to see common themes, the more digital adoption that happens. So I really like that. That would have caught my eye for sure.
Yeah. Agreed. Anything else?
Yeah, I guess obviously
Yeah.
that it's referencing to SWAN members and utilities. And then I think overall that it's one consistent theme around data quality, but there's kind of a lot of different points at the bottom, right? It's talking about water quality, water usage, that asset management and environmental data. And so you're kind of covering a lot, but in one narrow lens. And I think that there's kind of something compelling about that.
Yeah, well said. And at first you might read this and say, oh, maybe they're trying to do too much, but at the core of it, they're still focusing on making sensor data a strategic asset. And so that resonated with us. And I will say one more thing. One is to just go back to Maria, your earlier point. They absolutely reference two utilities, fantastic. We've had other really good ones that reference kind of that collaboration again to utilities, so that works well. I cut it off here just for the sake of the slide, but they actually went a step further and talked about kind of sensor data quality and kind of that verification process and how it impacts people, processes, and technology, right? So kind of the stakeholders needed to verify the data, issues related to trust from the insights, different technology capabilities from data quality scoring and auditing and cleaning. And it was all done still in the amount of words that were enabled, and it flowed really nicely. So it was almost like they left us no choice but to say, oh, this has to be accepted, right? That's kind of what you want to get across. So again, a really fantastic abstract. What about any suggestions for titles here? What do you think they went? Or if you're a marketing manager for this company, what would you suggest? No wrong answers, only creative ones. I see Tony, the wheels are in motion.
It has to be something about the power of a meter.
Power of a meter. Alan, Anastasia, Larissa, I see some familiar names here as well. Travis. You don't have to give it away though if you don't want. You see Amy on the call, Evan. And great. Members. So they went, I can give it away. They went pretty, I want to say basic, but they used a strong word after that. So it started with kind of the sensor data quality. So you understood right away what their focus was, but they called it the lifeblood of a smart water network. And that's a bold statement. And I guess what I can say is you don't want to oversell your company or product, but to be a little controversial, be a little bit bold might not be a bad idea to get noticed, right? So I'll just leave it at that. That kind of stuck with us as well. Let's keep going. I think I talked about this. This is probably worthy of just kind of another image, just for the sake of honing in that point. Really, really avoid sales pitches. I would even argue it's better not to submit than to submit a sales pitch. We're looking for these storytellers. All of you are storytellers. Any project has stories to tell. Those kind of, you'll see it in our abstract submission for the conference specifically. We're looking to unpack some of those moments of truth that happens throughout a project, not only at the end of a project. So we really want to find what worked well, what were some of the lessons learned, the hard truths of how you worked and scaled, and maybe some of the existing challenges you're facing now and some new approaches. We're very, very curious. The more you can keep this data driven as much as possible throughout your story will be helpful. And of course, tying it back to the theme. But just wanted to mention that. And then a couple of questions to consider for yourselves. Think of this as a little mini checklist, if you will, just before you hit submit. And then the last part of this call, this workshop will be just open-ended Q&A. I know some of you might have other calls to attend to. I want to thank you for sitting on with us, and you'll have access to this recording. But just a quick before we open it up to Q&A, some guiding prompts, kind of self-reflection, whether it's you or your colleague. Am I just copying, pasting, and just trying to submit for the sake of submitting? Really recommend not doing that. Really try to tailor as much as possible. It doesn't mean you can't be inspired by past projects, but still past submissions, but we really are looking for that kind of new storytelling. Have you actually tailored the abstract to fit the theme? If there's a graphic, have I referenced it? Have I really reviewed it to see what could be interesting to unpack? And again, those are just suggestions. Excuse me. Does my title stand out? Again, controversy or being bold is not necessarily negative. Is it too salesy, too pushy? If not, refine, share it with another colleague. By the way, a tip from us, share it even with a colleague from outside of water. Does it resonate with them? Would they get it? Right? We're all in this kind of bubble together, sometimes too much. Have I written out too many buzzwords or jargons? Is it too long? Is it kind of not succinct enough? It's probably worth a rewrite or a revisit. Is it clear that I'm mentioning some type of case study? And Tony, to address your point, also a journey if there's a new project or new story to tell, right? Do I have support for the submission? If I am mentioning a utility or partners, please make sure you get that submission approval so it's not awkward later when you receive the congratulations email. And again, am I the right person to submit this? I do want to comment just one thing, and then I think there's a comment for me. Oh, Tony, no worries if you have to go. This question here is almost a self-reflective one of am I the right person? Oftentimes we see either large utilities or a large company, and it could be the designated POC that's submitting, and it could be a marketing director, business development, sales director. It doesn't have to be, right? It could be the actual project owner that led this project. It could be a customer account manager. It could be someone in the IT, OT teams. Really kind of think who would be best to tell the story as well. It's really helpful to get their perspective on the abstract and not only from the marketing BD sales angle. That's a tip that I think will go a long way in hopefully really crafting, really winning abstracts. I just want to stop here before we open to Q&A. Thank you, Mark. Mark, if you need to drop off, no worries. I think the rest is, yeah, I have some open questions, but then I'll stop sharing the screen just to have a conversation where, if you have experienced abstract frustration and maybe lessons learned from debriefs or briefs you had, if you found this session helpful, if there's any tips as we look to craft more types of workshops like this, and then any events besides these two, the Phoenix one and the Berlin conference. Phoenix one, SWAN Americas, is due in a couple days. The Berlin one is due January 10th. But besides that, if there's any events on your radar, we'd love to know about that. And hopefully these tips will be transferable, but we can't guarantee if it's not a SWAN event that the tips will apply. I'm gonna stop there just to have a little bit more of a conversation, but thank you for the thumbs up, Maria, great. Anybody else, open questions, feedback, anything else that we can do to kind of best prepare you ahead of time?
Hey, this is Evan. I just had a couple kind of logistics questions. The first one is the abstract due at the end of the 22nd?
You mean in time zone? That's a really good question. If we do not have one, then consider it end of day wherever you are. How about that?
Okay, easy enough. And then the other one, just to get a kind of idea of what presenting would actually look like. I haven't presented at a conference before. How long are the presentations themselves usually, or do they vary kind of depending on the scope of the abstract submitted?
It can vary. I'll give a couple examples. We do have an overall framework that's worked really well. And I will say with a caveat, it's very different. No worries, Travis. It's very different than some other events. So we do not have 30-minute presentations where you're kind of behind a lectern, almost lecture style. Our traditional sweet spot for SWAN panel sessions, so usually when you submit and you're accepted, it's part of a panel. It's usually an 8 to 12-minute presentation. That is the sweet spot. It sounds short, but that's just the presentation slot for you. Then there's an interactive Q&A. So you're actually on stage anywhere from 45 to 55 minutes. This is our sweet spot. There's a little bit of wiggle room depending on the amount of panelists on that panel. We try to keep it to 3 plus a moderator to ensure enough time. But that, Evan, to answer your broad question, that's usually what happens. There's two different formats, usually open discussion based, kind of less slides, more really just Q&A. The other version is some presentation slides followed by that Q&A and audience. We have had some really good abstracts, Evan, that have actually been, let's call it raised to or elevated to a keynote level. And that usually is around 15 to 20 minutes. But that really, really depends. And that will be much later after we review all the submissions. But sometimes we receive really fantastic stories that we feel actually would be well received as a kind of a longer keynote type of presentation, Evan. So that's to answer your questions. That's more or less the SWAN standard for our events.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Kind of short and sweet, tell the story, go right into really interesting discussions. No, it's a great question. Anybody else? Whether it's logistical or technical questions on the conference, on the abstract process?
Hi, I have a question. It's Melissa here from Xylem. This is my first submission for SWAN. So I'm really grateful for the session with you. Thanks a lot. I have two questions. One is, do you have other examples of interactive or unique types of presentations? I really like the idea of having that, the one about, the utility pretending to be a hacker and, that kind of dialogue. I find it really exciting and engaging. Are there other formats that have worked before? Previously, I've done things like live polls in different sessions. What other are there quizzes and stuff like that that could be interesting?
Yeah, great questions. So the role reversal is actually interesting. It was actually feedback we received from a member from our utility advisory group, and it was almost a reverse process. We kind of reached out, we did some direct outreach to find people that fit the role or based on their abstracts thought that they could, let's call it, take on that role. So it was a little bit of both ways. We have done live polling to kind of get a sense for the room and then share results. That actually worked really well in that role reversal. I don't know, Amir, if you want to add anything as well, but we're very curious to get some unique submissions. Yeah, go for it.
We had a prove it panel. So actually live demos. If you're able to do like a live demo, make it hands-on of your solution or have like utility kind of explain how they're doing it, makes it more interactive. That could be good too.
Thanks. I think that's a great one for a live demo. And is that something, let's say we submit the abstract, do we explain in the abstract that we would like to demonstrate this using an interactive session and explain a little bit about how we'd like to present it? Or is that something that happens after you review the abstract?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I want to say we have all the answers, but actually sometimes it's just about asking the right questions. I don't know if we can answer that just yet, Melissa. I'm curious to receive it and have our utilities review. I think you can always end, Melissa, with a line. There's different approaches to illustrating or demonstrating this use case, and kind of leave it a little bit open-ended for now. And I think if it's well received, Melissa, there's usually a little bit of back and forth. If your abstract is accepted and we see that this could really resonate well, we can collaboratively think right together what could be a nice output. What would that look like right on stage? So I don't necessarily know if we have all the answers for you on that specific question, but I'm definitely curious to receive a submission that is a little bit, outside of the box, let's say.
Thanks. And then just my second question was
Sure.
For the presentation, do we only allow one presenter? Previously, we've kind of had a presenter and a utility in a dialogue with each other that worked really well previously. How would that work for this?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question that we've kind of toyed around with every year, like lessons learned. We used to say a lot of times it's great if there's a utility representing on your behalf. That's always really a great scenario. There are scenarios where there's an invitation to do a co-presentation. The challenge, Melissa, has been when there's too many people on stage, you end up losing track of that time. And it's really, really important for our event to ensure there's a good balance between content and networking. So anytime you have too many people on stage, and that's a little bit of our own lesson learned, we try to avoid that. So if you can, right, and we might come back to you and say, we know you said you can co-submit. We really do want to optimize and have just one speaker. We will usually recommend that that speaker be a utility, but we do understand if that's not feasible, right? But that will be a priority item. So we're really, really trying not to have 8 people on stage. Let's put it that way in the simplest terms. The best marketing you can have, of course, is to have a utility tell that story on your behalf. If needed, and if we can make it work, there are some cases we'll have a co-presentation, but there really has to be a very strong rationale for doing that. And if we can make it up with the lineup that we have, it might be too early to answer that.
Great, thank you. That perfectly answered. Thank you so much.
Sure. I also see some questions in chat. No worries if you're late. Yes, thanks, Amir, for answering. Everything will be available. Anybody else? We have about 7 minutes. We are going to make sure to stop right on time. Any other questions, comments, concerns you have? Or Amir, Shayna, if there's anything else that you want to add, kind of tips, suggestions as people craft these. Again, the Americas Phoenix workshop asterisks are due Friday end of day, meaning on Monday, we want to send this out for review. And January 10th is the deadline for the SWAN annual conference in Berlin. There will be also an APAC workshop November 2025 in Sydney, but that's to be, details will be announced later on. Any questions, comments? Okay. That means we should look forward to receiving some really, really strong submissions. Stay tuned. Everyone will receive the recording and slides. And I think you all know how to reach all of us by email. I'll just drop my email as well. If there's any follow-up questions, I'm happy to do my best to try to address them. And thanks again for everyone for joining. Appreciate your time. Take care.